Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 8th and last of the English Learner Communities of Practice. I'm Marta Hernandez, Executive Director of Californians Together. And today we're going to turn our attention toward the future and on centering the needs of English learner in school reopening plans. I want to thank all of you for your participation, for sharing your expertise, your challenges, and your experiences. And I want to give a special shout out to our wonderful facilitators, many of whom participated in all or most of the sessions. Before we begin, I feel like it would be inappropriate not to comment for just a moment about what is happening across the country and the world. And I know that you and our fellow educators and advocates are grieving and feeling the pain and sadness around all that happened with the murder of George Floyd and all the other Black lives taken by police violence. What is hopeful is that we are seeing such a groundswell of support with worldwide protests for policy change and action. And this has reignited our youth. And so today, as George Floyd is being laid to rest, we must keep marching forward. We must continue to say that Black lives matter. And so with that, we know that education plays a key role in achieving social justice. And so we turn to the issue of equity and access for English learners. And so today we will provide some considerations and examples of how educators can ensure that reopening conversations and plans are equity focused and prioritize the needs of English learners. So, next slide, please. Today, we are going to share the data from the CalTOG survey and information garnered through our Community of Practice series. Following, we will have a panel from the county office perspective, sharing their efforts to prioritize the needs of emergent bilingual students upon reopening. Also presenting, we have a team of staff development and curriculum specialists in English language arts and English language development from the Tulare County Office of Education. We have Alicia Ramirez, who is also a co-contributor to the Belief professional learning modules and also an LE partner. Presenting with Alicia are her amazing colleagues, Lenore Medina and Tammy Milligan. After, we will again engage in breakout sessions that will provide you with an opportunity to respond to questions focused on the reopening of schools. We will return as a whole group to hear 2 additional presentations. We will have a district level presentation titled Centering English Learners in Elk Grove Unified School District. And that will be presented by Lucy Mullinger, the Director of English Learner Services for the Elk Grove Unified School District, which is the 5th largest district in California. Prior to working in Elk Grove, she was the EL coordinator for Sonoma Valley School District and a principal and teacher in the Fruitvale neighborhood of Oakland for 12 years. Lisa Lavisser is co-presenting, and she is the program specialist for the Office of Family and Community Engagement in the Elk Grove Unified School District. She was previously an associate director for parent-teacher home visits and a classroom teacher for more than 10 years. Our culminating presentation will be delivered by none other than Dr. Lori Olson. Lori has served as a writer, a researcher, and a spokesperson for Californians Together and is now serving as president of the board. She also created models and examples of powerful, joyful classrooms and schools for English learners as former director of the Sobrato Early Academic Language Model, and she also served as the co-chair of the EL Roadmap Work Group that developed the policy. She is currently the Director of Design for the English Learner Roadmap Implementation for Systemic Excellence Initiative. and she will focus on considerations and priorities for meeting the needs of English learners in reopening schools. So we want to make sure that you remember to please write your comments and questions in the chat room during panel presentations. And after the presentation, we'll do our best to ask the panel members to address your questions and have some time to share resources. And so, as you know, many of you responded to our Californians Together survey. And so, we are going to present what we have learned from our survey and the Community of Practice series. And so, of over the 650 responses, what we found was that 27 were teachers, and 17% of those were English learner teachers. 46 were categorized as EL coordinators or other school or county office staff, TOSAs and coaches, and 16% were district or school administrators. There was a representation from suburban, urban, and rural districts, with 79% from suburban and urban districts. The next pie chart illustrates that 64 of the respondents serve PK through 12th grade students, with 26 serving elementary and 10% serving secondary. So in terms of student engagement, and in terms of the percentage of English learners engaging in weekly distance learning, of the 595 respondents, 55% indicated that less than half of their English learners were engaged on a weekly basis. 22% revealed that 0 to 25% of English learners were engaged in distance learning on a weekly basis. And also, in terms of weekly face-to-face instruction, the data indicates that 34% of administrators and 40% of teachers report 0 to 1 hour weekly of face-to-face instruction. 51% of administrators and 36% of teachers report 2 to 3 hours of face-to-face instruction weekly. However, 76% of the teachers reported that the average weekly face-to-face instruction was 3 hours or less. And so we all know that there's something magical about being live. It just helps to make students feel connected. There's a different magic about it. To establish trust and build community, synchronous teaching is a must. And so when students, have face-to-face interaction, we see more engagement and learning. And so we see that students are not getting sufficient time. And so in terms of the ELD instruction and materials, we note that 61% of the respondents indicated that their district was not providing weekly interaction with ELD teachers. As well, there were low percentages of respondents that indicated that integrated ELD is being provided in the content areas of math, science, and social studies. Only 15% reported that there were project-based options that don't require a device. It's interesting to note that only 3% of the respondents reported the provision of hard copy packets, and that 4% of the respondents indicated that districts were leaving it up to teachers. Most teachers that registered in the communities of practice expressed a need for support in integrated and designated ELD, as well as the need for instructional resources. In terms of dual language programs, what we noted, and again, the number size here is 357, about half of the respondents who answered this, of course, are involved in dual language immersion programs. And so of those respondents, 82% reported that some or all students did have access to materials and curriculum in languages other than English. And so that is something that is very positive. 59% provided materials in both digital and hard copy. And so 90% total in digital and 69% total in hard copy. And so that was a bright spot. In terms of family engagement, 75% responded that district communications are in fact provided in the home language. However, 58% responded that they neither agree nor disagree or strongly disagree that opportunities are provided to families to learn strategies to support education at home. And so this mirrors some data from a Beacon survey. And the Beacon data indicates that yes, 93% of homeschool communication, was being received by, parents regarding online classes or distance learning. However, 31% indicated that they did not understand the instructions. And then also, we noted that 45% of the parents in the Beacon survey said that they did not get the support that they needed to help their child at home with distance learning. And so, as the school year draws to a close, it's very clear that the national experiment with distance learning can best be described as a mixed bag. Districts were slow to roll out distance learning plans. There were huge issues with access to devices and the internet. Many students did not engage and many dropped out. Integrated and designated ELD proved to be very challenging. Teachers had to retool, which was frustrating. Families lacked the support that they needed, and the language and learning needs of English learners were not adequately addressed. The experiences that you have shared during the community of practice paint a powerful picture about how challenging distance learning has been. Since distant learning will likely continue in the fall 2020 in some form, perhaps toggling between hybrid and distance learning, we must do it better than the spring. And it will be the hardest fall in the history of education. We need to ensure that we center the needs of English learners as we plan for reopening schools. So we're going to begin with our next presentation from Tulare County Office of Education.
Thank you, Martha. We appreciate the opportunity to connect with this audience. We recognize that we have so many colleagues and allies in this work. We want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about how we've been working to prioritize the needs of English learners or emergent bilingual students, or we might even say emergent multilingual students as we gear up for reopening. And so that's going to take us to a couple of resources that we want to share with you. And those resources are going to be both statewide resources as well as local resources. We're going to post some guiding questions for consideration in the conversation as we move forward. So one of the things that we've been working on with colleagues from across the state, so this might be a connection for several of you, is we've been toying with the idea on how to improve services for English learners, both in the existing and the current context, and also thinking about as we reopen in the coming year, whether it be a brick and mortar learning experience, a blended learning experience, or a purely virtual learning experience. We invite rather educators to keep these three ideas in mind, that regardless of the context, we want to continue to connect with learners on a really personal level. We want to recognize their context and their experience. We want to know about their wellness and their progress moving forward. We want to make sure that the opportunities that we're providing them are meaningful and that they're connecting with the important content learning that is happening across their schooling experiences. So we're tapping into those social studies connections, those science connections, the literacy experiences that students are already engaged in across the year and across the space. And finally, we want to very intentionally, and going back to your data, Martha, around integrated and designated ELD, we want to be sure to really deliberately connect with language, ensuring that we're designing learning opportunities, both integrated and designated again, so that students can begin to lift up the language and continue to use the language and grow their proficiency even from afar. As we move to support our districts, again, thinking about our current and most recent context and in the coming months, we want to invite our districts and our schools to really keep these things in mind as they build about their own lens. We recognize that we don't want to make any assumptions about systems or about student experiences, about educators and where they are in this virtual learning experience. Instead, we want them to kind of tap into what they're already doing and look for those bright spots in what they're already doing and make improvements to better support multilingual students. So this might start with thinking about a positive practice that they already embrace. It's already an initiative. And we might use, for example, say like a writing workshop initiative. This is already something that our district believes in. It's already a practice that our students have experienced prior to moving into our stay-at-home orders. We want to hold on to that. But when we think about something like positive practice around a writing workshop, we're considering how it lifts out student voices in really authentic ways, how it taps into and leverages their experience, and how it makes students the experts and the sharers around really important learning. And when we're thinking about that, we're considering, well, what are the specific needs of English learners within the context of this writing workshop? How are we scaffolding? How are we supporting? How are we providing them opportunities to use the listening, the speaking, the reading and writing, so that we can fully engage them in all of the linguistic demands, all of the language domains, and embed the ELD standards in a really tight and intentional way. And finally, how are we adapting all of that learning and connecting with those learners with the learning, with taking everything that we know about that learning context in mind? So if we have a brick and mortar lesson, what does that look like for English learners around this positive practice? If we're in a blended learning environment, how are we adapting that? How are we adjusting our scaffolds? How are we adjusting the delivery of content? And if we're in a blended model, how are we ensuring that we're prioritizing the direct teaching that has to happen as part of the face-to-face instruction in relation to that which students can practice and employ more independently? So we invite our districts to think about how those three ideas intersect, and that will be the sweet spot for them moving forward.
And as we go forward, we want to keep those questions in mind when we're framing that lens, really keeping in mind what do we know about our English learners, and the things that we know are still the same. Do we know what typology they are, their proficiency level, specific learning needs that they might have? But we also now need to think about the assets that they're bringing with them from their home and from their family, and how can that help us to better serve their needs. And then in the learning context, what considerations should we keep in mind when we're shifting our learning context from a physical classroom to a virtual learning environment? Looking at that learning context, we need to think about the scaffolds that we're providing, and also keeping that learning at a high intellectual level, keeping the rigor high. How will we provide that designated ELD that our ELs need to move forward in their language in English? And how can we make sure that they're interacting with us and with their peers? So those are questions we have to keep in mind. And then when we get to practice, what practices or initiatives are in place that need to be adapted now that we're in a new model, a new whatever your environment is? How do we adapt that for our English learners? Keeping everything within that lens, including the formative assessments that we need. How do we know that they're learning? How do we know what they need next? How are we providing feedback? And how does that look in a virtual environment? So looking at how we might change our practices while keeping the expectations high for learning for our ELs is paramount at this point. So we have to continue to keep these things in mind. These are things that in any environment, whether it's in your classroom, virtual, hybrid, or brick and mortar. We found that these are essential to our English learners. And that number one is oral language, that we have to continue to find ways to provide and model the oral language in whatever environment they are in. And so that's got to still be there. Differentiation, we've got to continue to remember that differentiation is important for our ELs. And that's not just differentiating based on their levels, but also differentiating on what they have and where they are and whether they have a computer or not, or what's going on in their home. There's a new level and a new layer of differentiation now for our ELs to keep in mind. And those scaffolds that our ELs rely on so much within the classroom, and that the teacher usually is helping to provide and take away as needed, our ELs still need those scaffolds, but now they need them in a different way. So they need them in so many visuals and videos and things that they can access independently when you're not with them. So those are some things that we have to keep in mind as far as providing those scaffolds in a different way. And keeping that intellectual challenge, intellectual rigor high. In distance learning, we have to maintain the richness and the quality of instruction, and giving our English learners that rigorous access to content, while we also are working within formative assessment practice. What do we need to provide in ways of assessment? How do we gauge how our students are doing, and how, in whatever format they're learning, how are we checking for understanding? How are we giving feedback, which is so important to not only the students, but to the parents. They need to have the feedback that will tell them if they're on the right track or not. And then lastly, building upon their assets rather than focusing on the gaps that our learners have. Recognizing where they are and recognizing the fact that they bring learning to the table, that our English learners are coming to us with learning that's happening in the home every day. Students are doing things at home that could serve as resources for learning. How can we tap into that? How can we leverage that learning that's happening at home? And how might we use what we learn to improve the learning opportunities that they are receiving from here on out? So just one example, if a learner is interested in cooking and they're doing that at home with their parents, how might you leverage that point and use that interest as an asset to their learning in many subject areas, which could be in math, it could be reading, writing, language development, science, could cross over to many different areas. So leveraging those interests and those assets that they have at home is extremely important. Okay, now I'd like to pass it on to Lenore.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lenore Medina. I'm happy to be with you this afternoon. I'm just going to walk you through kind of a historical perspective of what we've done in Tulare County with regard to supporting English learners and supporting our EL students. So when COVID first hit in March, you know, all of our resources were gathered, and our consultants and everybody, our staff, were working around the clock in creating a distance learning website. And what we did is we just kind of gathered all of the resources that we knew were out there and just put them together in a nice package, and we shared those. So thank you, Efren. TCOE rocks. Yes, we do. So we've gathered those resources, and they will be shared with you also. We did it by grade level. We did it by content area. We did it by audience. So we had pages for students, pages for teachers, pages for parents. We had it in multilingual. So there were a lot of resources that were put together from math, from science, from ELA, from ELD, from the arts, all different content areas. So that's a resource that we're providing for you today. The next thing we did is, once those started to roll out, we were getting questions, and we felt the need to tap into the field and find out what what the needs were of our teachers. So we set up office hours or consultant chats that were kind of set up as open office hours. And we did those for ELA and ELD. And we just really needed to gather some data and tap into teachers, listen to what their needs were. And again, being very needs responsive in saying, well, what is it that teachers are struggling with and how can we offer and provide support? The third thing we did that also came out of the understanding being needs responsive was that there was, as Martha stated earlier, there was a huge disconnect with students who did not have access to technology, did not have devices, did not have hotspots or Wi-Fi. Even if they had a device, they didn't have Wi-Fi. So our office felt the need to develop what we call the ELD choice boards. And what they are just basically like bingo cards, and they were intended to be printable so that students could practice oral language. As Tammy mentioned, that's very important. They were ELD standards-based activities, and we have a picture of one of those choice boards there. Everybody has family pictures at home. Everybody has, you know, a spatula or a molcajete or a spoon or a lamp or things that kids could engage with their families, with their siblings, with themselves in front of a mirror, just again to engage in that oral language and standards-based, meaningful, authentic language opportunities. We also developed, it was so well received that we also developed companion slides for those that did have access to technology. So that's what you see there. Look at a family photo. We incorporated a lot of language, sentence frames, scaffolds, things that we know are helpful for English learner students. The next thing that we embarked on were providing webinars and professional learning. So we've also linked a lot of our resources there through our Common Core Connect. Our ELD resources have a lot of support for teachers, a lot of support even for students, for parents, different audiences. We also provided professional learning around the EL roadmap and the 4 principles, and also did some learning twice with the EL roadmap, the teacher toolkit. Next slide. So as we move forward, things that are really important that we'd like you to keep in mind with this, you know, the lens of ELs and opening and keeping equity as a priority, is that we continue to build in those connections to the principles of the roadmap and really just pursue equity. That's kind of the main focus for us. We also felt that aside from just language and academic needs of our students, we also had to provide for their SEL needs, especially right now, especially with what's going on in our world, and just connecting with kids and having them connect with their teachers and through their parents as well. Very, very important not to forget that part. And then just finally to just, again, as Tammy mentioned, think about those assets that students come with and all of the opportunities that our multilingual learners need. And so that informs, and so that we filter our practice, and everything that we do and every decision that we make is filtered through that lens. So it's very important to remember that. Next slide. So here we've just a collection. We just put all those resources that I just shared with you. The first one is our distance learning website. I encourage you to explore that. There's a plethora of resources there. We've also linked the CISC subcommittee work group for designated ELD for distance learning. Both the printable choice board that can be put in a packet for students that don't have technology, as well as the Google slide companion is there. And we also, this morning, we just engaged in our second day of a partnership with the Stanford Graduate School of Education, tapping into learning at home and using what kids bring and what families already have, and how we can leverage that in improving their education through distance learning. And finally, the EL Roadmap Resource Hub is a collection where you can find the toolkits, the roadmap, the principles, a lot of great stuff that's there in the Resource Hub. So if you have any, next slide, please. If you have any questions for us, there's our website, commoncore.tcoe.org, and you have all of our names and emails listed. We'd be happy to be a resource for you. Thank you very much.
So we're giving Tulare County Office of Education a standing ovation. And so thank you so much for sharing all of these resources and all of your, keeping the lens on equity. So thank you so, so much. I'm going to go to the next slide really quickly. We know now it's time for the breakout rooms. And I'm just going to say that we need to keep the focus on the reopening of school issues. And again, the facilitator note-taking guides are on the bit.ly link that's provided on this slide. I'm going to go to the next slide. These are the questions to address. You know what in the presentations thus far reflects what's happening in your school or school district. What have been some of your challenges in providing English learners with distance learning during school closures? What are your plans for mitigating these challenges and ensuring that the needs of ELs and emergent bilingual students are met? And what should all districts consider in their reopening plans to ensure that the needs of English learners, emergent bilingual students are met? And so we will be in the breakout rooms until 4:50. And so we will see you then.
For this opportunity. As we look at how Elk Grove Unified School District is keeping ELs at the center of our phase 2 work, I wanted to start by thanking our families, EL coordinators, EL instructional coaches, program specialists, bilingual teaching associates, committed family and community engagement staff, site leaders, and of course, our dedicated teachers who continue to go above and beyond for our English learners every day. I'm Lucy Bollinger, the Director of English Learner Services, and I'm fortunate to be joined by Lisa Lavasser, who leads our Office of Family and Community Engagement. Our departments collaborated before going into distance learning, but are doing so now more than ever. So in Elk Grove, we serve around 64,000 students. Almost 10,000 of our students are ELs, which is 15% of the population. However, when we include our reclassified students who we monitor and continue to support, that makes it more like 37% of our population. We feel incredibly fortunate to have 112 languages spoken in our district, recognizing the assets of our multilingual families and what they bring. So for phase 1 of distance learning, part of our district's guidance document for curriculum and instruction had TK through 12th grade designated and integrated ELD, including newcomer and duly identified student and teacher resources. Not a one-size-fits-all EL approach, but looking at the different typologies. And that was put together by our EL expertise, which is made up of our EL program specialists and our coaches in collaboration with our curriculum and professional learning department. May 29th was all of our students' last day of the 1920 school year. For phase 2, starting mid-May, our superintendent, Christopher Hoffman, gathered a strategic planning team made up of around 40 directors, bargaining units, and cabinet members. His charge was that this unprecedented time provides us with an opportunity to truly innovate and focus on equity. He noted that even if we go back to brick and mortar classrooms, it should not look the way it had before if we are truly going to serve all of our students. Matt Espinosa from our Office of Educational Equity led the daily virtual meetings, which have included research readings, articles, small group and large group discussions, always with the equity lens. As that strategic planning team met, we decided on 4 characteristics of our work. So principled, our approach is grounded in our shared values and mission, which includes our Elk Grove E4 system framework, our educational equity framework, our framework for high quality instruction, and of course, the California English Learner Roadmap. For innovative, we wanted to be as creative as possible to uphold our essential values while negotiating the limitations. So that includes lots of ongoing brainstorming, potential piloting, and really questioning traditional ways of doing things and learning from the recommendations of experts in education and other school systems to inspire that thinking. Collaborative. We want both the strategic planning guidance and the finalized plan to have multiple perspectives and really to ensure the diversity of everyone that is part of those teams. And finally, strategic. Reviewing the most current conditions, recommendations, and data, and then having ongoing review as we really launch into this next school year. In this team, we also created our foundational values for our guidance with the expectation that they will be woven into any and all future planning. And those are equitable, responsive, and safe. We broke down each of those and what they mean with further characteristics. For example, under responsive, we have reciprocal, and to us, that means that there's ongoing feedback and communication, and it doesn't just go one way. Along with innovation, collaboration has been another key to keeping ELs centered in our phase 2 planning work.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. I'm going to take it from here. So as Lucy mentioned, collaboration was extremely important to kind of moving this ship, right, and figuring out phase 2. So we, as a team, our strategic planning team, decided to use the building a house metaphor to get this work done. As you all know, building a house, there's different parts, a different timeline that goes into that. And so we first started with a planning of what that would look like. And Lucy mentioned the equity, safety, and responsiveness, that everything that we started to plan and think about in the future needed to have that lens, those lenses, as well as innovation. We were encouraged to be innovative, to not go back to what we were doing in the past. Then we broke off into tactical planning teams, and those tactical planning teams are kind of like the blueprint of a house when you're building a house. What do the different rooms look like? What you need to have in the different rooms? And so our tactical teams were formed and led by different strategic planning members in our district, as well as some program specialists and some principals. We ensured that there was the EL member and a member of our family community engagement office on each tactical team, because we know that whatever we plan in the future is going to impact our ELs and our families. So as we created this blueprint, we were using our tacticals team's guidance, which is kind of our next stage. What are we going to be doing now? And so as we created these plans, we asked people to be flexible and to be mindful of how and all the different details that go into these plans, the communication that is involved, that we keep in mind our ELs and our families. And then those are all the details, like an interior decorator. And then finally, when you're building a house, there's weather conditions, right? Sometimes it rains, sometimes it's super hot. And so we asked all of our teams to be nimble and to be flexible as we build these plans, because we know that there is going to be changing conditions depending on the different health recommendations and budget projections in the future. So as these teams planned, we asked all of them to use this kind of strategic planning structure. Each team took these different categories: planning category elements, essential values and features, limitations, guiding questions for strategic planning, and then what is the plan. Every team took this structure and began to dive in creating a plan. And we had various tactical teams, from school schedules to a team focusing just on curriculum and instruction, a team focused on expanded learning, special education, behavioral health and social emotional learning, health and hygiene, extracurriculars, and family and community engagement. Then we had specialized operational planning teams that were already in existence doing some work. That's a communications team, or transportation, operations and facilities, technology, human resources, safety and security, and food and nutrition. Did we mention earlier that we're a large district? There's a lot of different teams that we have in place, but we made sure that the family voice was heard and that the EL student was thought of in all of this planning. So as we reflect over, the past, it seems like months, but really we've only been planning this next phase over the past couple of weeks. We've thought about what worked over the past several months when we moved and transitioned to distance learning, and we made sure that EL and families were at the center of that. What could we do to improve? What worked well and what didn't? We did have a few bright spots. Some of our bright spots, for example, were Many of our teachers became experts in different apps that helped them translate materials, for example, and communicate. So for example, talking points. We heard from lots of teachers and families that they loved this app and that they were able to speak to families in multiple languages. We created in collaboration, the EL department and the FACE office, creating videos for our families to help them find some success through distance learning and some tips on how to find some success at home with academics. And all of those videos were translated so all of our families could have the opportunity to watch and learn. And then we just started a summer support program for our newcomer students, which we have heard so far. We've only been at it for 2 days, but it's been a success so far. So we're gonna take that. But we're also learning from our challenges. We know that there wasn't enough translation that happened. We know that tech and connectivity was also an issue. Then as we finalize our plans and our details about what's going to be our next phase, we wanted to make sure that all teams had this guidance. And that guidance is will be provided that will lead to a more equitable plan. We want to not increase the inequities, we want to decrease as we move to this next phase. The guidance will be inclusive of all stakeholders, right? Not just our most vocal and our most educated, all stakeholders that participate in our district. We wanted to make sure our guidance for our families, our EL families especially, is clear, concise, not overwhelming. That was something that we heard in our surveys, that it was too much. It was overwhelming in the beginning. We wanted to make sure that we evaluate every element of this plan. What is working, what is not working, and then adapt it and change. Take that feedback that we're receiving and make some changes. And then we want to make sure that we maximize our current resources. We know we're going to be facing a budget cut, so how can we do that in a way that is the most equitable? And then setting boundaries without over limiting our options. And then lastly, we just wanted to briefly share with you, we have a very robust research and evaluation department in our district, and we were able to administer a couple of surveys. And so all this planning that Lucy and I spoke about really came about from the feedback that we got in our distance learning surveys. I was very proud to have Lucy's department, the Family and Community Engagement department, Student Support and Health Services, all be willing to get on the phone and talk to families. So we not only sent out surveys via email and text message and had hard copies, but we also had phone calls. And families reported back that they really liked talking to someone from the district and someone in their language and their home language as well. We learned that these surveys, or from the surveys, we learned about the different technology access that folks had and what their initial distance learning experience was like. Some of our findings were that there were some challenges with connectivity. There were some challenges with some communication of not getting to connect with their teacher on a regular basis. So we're taking this feedback and changing that for this next phase when we reopen schools. We're excited about this process. We're excited about the possibilities of what the future holds, and we look forward to sharing with what our results are in the future. That's it. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Lori, I believe.
Yes. Gonna share my screen. Good afternoon, everybody.
Gloria, I just want to, stop and say, let's give a round of applause to Elk Grove, to Lisa, and thank you so much.
Definitely. I'm feeling very appreciative of the brilliance and the expertise and the heart of those who've presented and the people in the breakout room I got to be part of. I'm hoping to add some to the thinking about what we ought to have as our priorities as we re-enter and reopen schools in the fall. There's no question that, wait, let me just get to where I can change. Okay, there's no question that schools this fall are going to be dealing with a lot, keeping everybody healthy and safe, responding to the disruptions in learning from the spring and from the summer, being flexible in response to the unpredictability of the virus. We know it's going to be a year in which
in most places, there's going to be some kind of mix of distance learning, hybrid combinations of brick and mortar schooling, at home learning, and that whatever we start with is likely to change. And so in the midst of all of that kind of change and need for flexibility, the question is, how do we keep our focus on English learners, and what does it really mean to centralize their need? And while the specifics of what we're facing is certainly unprecedented, we have some really solid things to base our answer to that question on. We have a really strong research base, knowledge base about English learners and what's important in their schooling and their language development. We have really fundamental commitment still, an enduring commitment to their, excuse me, I'm trying to find, to civil rights and basic educational access for English learners. And we have the vision, we have the principles of the English Learner Roadmap policy. And I think as we develop our reopening plans and approaches, we not only can, but we need to stay grounded in and committed to use that research, use those guiding principles and that vision as our anchor. And so I'm going to actually just start and do that with the roadmap with you this afternoon. The roadmap purposefully started with principle 1, which is about fundamentally creating safe, affirming, student-responsive, relationship-based schools that address the socio-emotional needs of students, that build strong partnerships with families. And that is always important. It's always important to start with, but it has never been as important as it is now as we face reopening our schools. In this new school year, as teachers face new students, students face new teachers with new routines, likely with a whole new structure of location and when and where they're expected to learn, and new health-related routines. And for our English learners, still in most cases facing a language barrier with their teachers, we have to start, number 1, with attention to building relationships, to connecting with students and families, getting to know them, enacting those welcoming, affirming environments, even across screens, even with our masks on. We have to be especially proactive in reaching out, in calling, in Zooming, in making that individual contact with families and students wherever possible. With attention to academics and skills, of course, but sharing significant time with the essential task of creating community and connection with our students and among our students. When the students enter schools this fall, they ought to be meeting their teachers, whether it's behind screens or masks or whatever, with the message from teachers, which is, we're real people here, we care about you, we want you here, we want to know about you, this is a place you belong. Asking, inviting, listening to how they're doing and who they are. And practically, this means planning in the system for time, systems, mechanisms of communication, things like teacher office hours and informal chat sessions, the practice of one-on-one phone calls and Zooming. It means administrators have to allocate time in teachers' schedules for this kind of extra communication effort. We have to provide the translation supports and apps for teachers to reach across the language divides to students and teachers. It means teachers need to plan for and take the time to seriously build community among their students, because we know that without establishing those relationships, that participation and learning won't occur. And then recognizing this is a hard time for our communities and families and students, as well as teachers. Everyone's struggling with the extra financial hardship and insecurity the pandemic has created, the fear of the virus, the sickness, the death, disruption. This start of school has to really address the socio-emotional needs of our students. Lessen their anxiety, lessen stress, take time to create forums for talking about what's happening, time for reassurance, and where compassion and caring ought to be the watch phrases of how we interact. And we know too that there are some basic needs that have to be addressed. With unemployment and health crises, many families and children are in need of nutritional support, food, financial assistance, healthcare, and at the very least, it means that we educators have to be on the lookout for what our students and families need. And schools have to be prepared with very robust resource and referral connections and mechanisms in place. And third, under English Learner Roadmap principle number 1, we have to support families as the partners we're relying upon them to be around student learning. Some portion, if not all, student learning is going to be relegated to at home, where families will play a crucial role around the environment for learning, around providing support for students as they try to understand assignments and do the assignments. Parents have to be the arbiters of schedules, the supporters around using technology. And that's a big lift for any family, for all families that have been through it this spring. But for English learner families, facing the language barrier, in addition with the majority of their students' teachers, less connected to schools, facing a disproportionate and large digital gap in access and experience with technology, this is really daunting. The success of our using distance learning and relying on online and digital technology requires that our schools mount significant support for families to play their roles. We just can't make this an era in which families feel that they're failing their children. Children feel their families are failing them because we failed to support the families. So again, mechanisms of translation and communication, as Elk Grove says, reciprocal translation, so that parents can ask for help, give feedback, give input, as well as get the information they need. We need designated staff per language. We need kind of one-stop places for each language group to go where they can get everything from information about schedules to help with using technology. And that's all principle 1 of the roadmap. Remember, there's more principles to go. Principle number 2, all about quality of instruction and meaningful access. Those important things, language in and through content, scaffolding, full standards-based curriculum, relevant curriculum, integrated designated ELD, always important, still important. We have to find ways to make that happen. But I don't have very much time today. And so rather than speak to the specifics of instruction, I want to instead direct your attention to what I think are some of the dangers in this era around which we have to be particularly vigilant. We're at a dangerous moment for English learners right now. It took us a decade or more to climb out of some of the harmful patterns that were set in place during No Child Left Behind and the English-only era of education in the state. And there are aspects of this pandemic crisis and tendencies inherent in distance learning that could easily push us back to those patterns unless we're vigilant. So first of all, with less direct instructional time with teachers and all of the concerns about the gaps in learning and skills that have gone on, there's a danger of a narrowing of the curriculum again, of cutting back on sciences and social studies and arts and returning to that focus just on the basics of math and a very narrow skill-based reading curriculum. We just cannot allow that to happen. So in curriculum planning and determining what's going to get covered in that really important instructional time with teachers, we have to hold on to the importance of the full curriculum. Our reopening plans should clarify students in this district, in this school, in this classroom will receive the full curriculum. The temptation to go with the ease of worksheets that can be done at home could easily return us to decontextualized discrete skill work drills, which we know are a disaster for English learners. As teachers transition to more instruction delivered to whole class online or to using asynchronous delivery of content and a reliance on students working at home without the availability of teacher support, the danger of sink or swim comes back on our plate. We know that language development is a social endeavor requiring interaction, engaging with language models, using language for purpose, but unless teachers are emphasizing formats, both online and in that critical face-to-face time in classrooms that enable and support interaction, we're in danger again that oral language and discourse could disappear from English learner schooling. And to leverage direct teacher time for this kind of instruction and scaffolding that's most needed, and to use home language time for application and practice means that there has to be real careful planning about how to use which setting in which ways. I think for English learners, we ought to prioritize their need for direct time with teachers as people are making decisions about which students are going to get what kind of time in school, as David from the small group said, with a real human being in a real place. Okay, one more comment about this curriculum and instruction part, and that is, I think we have some opportunities here. We can leverage the opportunities of distance learning, leverage the use of resources throughout a region, a district, a school that are bilingual to be able to provide small group real support around home language, to really leverage the at-home time with assignments that are about family connection and conversations and projects that engage families in this is a good time to really work on your home language development, where students are out in the community and can do community-based assignments that are really relative to their neighborhood, their community, and where outdoor focus is more possible as well. But again, using the roadmap as our guide, turning to principle number 3, none of this happens without ensuring that the systems are in place to support it all. And reopening plans have to build that system. Of particular relevance, and it's been spoken to in some of the comments so far, is simply ensuring access to the materials and the technology. That means districts have to know what kind of access our students have to be doing needs assessments, not just at the beginning of the year, but throughout the year, so that we ensure that students have the technology, the internet access, the printers, whatever they need at home, the paper, the pens, whatever their assignments require them to have, that should be made available to students and replenished as needed. And then it's not just having the technology, it's about the support for how to use it and become proficient in using it. And here again, the instructions for students and families need to be in home languages with easy guides and visuals for how to use those platforms, etc. And then yes, assessment and accountability. We need to know how this is working. This is a grand experiment right now, and we need to know, are our English learners getting access? How are they doing? How are they progressing? So reopening plans have to speak to how is it you're going to track, monitor, and respond to data on progress toward English proficiency, academic progress. Are they participating? Are they showing up? Are they attending? Are they getting minimum instructional minutes? Are they getting the full curriculum? Are they getting the ELD that they need? Are they getting the support? And finally, none of this can work. It won't work without adequate support for teachers and staff. And this is an absolutely essential part to be planned for. Teacher schedules that'll accommodate the various modalities needed, not just for teaching in class and online, but that accommodates time for those individual check-ins and flexible small groups and family communication and office hours, that includes planning time and collaboration time that they need to mount this very complex teaching and learning. They need professional learning and support and coaching regarding addressing the needs of English learners. Those TOSA positions, those coaches, those EL coordinators are your expertise. We have to protect those positions, even in this time of tight budgets, because we cannot assume teachers can pull this off, figuring it out on their own. And then of course, teachers need the technology, the devices, the equipment, the other support, in a way, their own personal equipment that's needed if they're gonna teach in these conditions. My time is up, and so my last comment is really about leadership, which is just your voice really matters now. Keep the needs of English learners front and center, with a sense of urgency about seeing to it that more gaps don't occur. Make meeting their needs important and visible. Make your response to English learners very concrete in the written reopening plans of sites and districts that speak to English learners directly, and in terms of the kind of messaging and guidance that we're giving to other teachers, to staff, to community. Keep a sharp equity lens, commit to vigilance to avoid what we know will do damage, and let's keep the vision and the assets-based commitments written in the California English Learner Roadmap Policy alive, front and center, as we find our way through this complicated time together. Thank you for your hard work, your creativity, your heart, your professionalism, and for being the community that's going to pull this off. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you for putting it all together so eloquently and with such passion and knowledge. And we appreciate you culminating our English learner communities of practice. And so next slide, please. We won't have an opportunity to engage in Q&A, but that's okay. If we can have the next slide. And so to close out our communities of practice, we decided to do something a little different, and I want to introduce Natalie Heredia, and she is a student writer, a performance artist who was based in LA, and she and her poetry team placed first at the Classic Slam, which is the largest poetry competition. And she's currently a senior at Larchmont Charter High. And so I'm just going to pass it to her because of time. So Natalie, it's all yours. If we can stop sharing the screen, I think, yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for your time and for having me. The title of my poem is entitled The Reality. Sometimes I wonder what it's like to be privileged. So I crawl into the ivory section of my mind with the words dirty white lies written at the entrance. In that alternate universe, I live in a blue house with a small yet elegant porch with a marble table set in a silver mailbox. I walk into my house filled with the scent of fresh lasagna and my mom's new lavender and honey candle filling the room. When I'm done eating, my private tutor comes to help me with my pre-calc homework. And then after 26 problems of how to use trig functions, I walk to the second floor bathroom and shower. When I'm out, I blow dry my blonde hair and rest my head to sleep in my own bed in my own room. Then and only then am I awakened by La Negra tiene tumbao, coming from the living room of my 900 square foot apartment. I walk out of the one bedroom we have and see my mother brooming to the rhythms of Celia Cruz. On the table, I see stale Honey Nut Cheerios, my dinner for the third night in a row. I'm reminded that I'm not privileged and that I have to work for what I have and want. I have to get on my knees and deep clean the bathroom before I can leave the house. I have to endure watching my mother spiral downwards every day while my brother, on the other hand, struggles because he's different. I have to watch videos on YouTube from 2008 on trig functions because my mother never made it to pre-calc. Then what really pulls me back into reality is when my hips start to sway to the sound of the music. I realize at that moment, wow, I am definitely Hispanic. I realize I get to build character based on the trials I face every day because my skin is a couple notches darker than my classmates. I realize I get to learn how to handle awkward stares from my rich peers when I say I've lived in a one bedroom with 2 other people for 17 years of my life. I realize I get to say I have my 4.0 GPA because of hard work and determination. I start to understand that I am privileged. Privileged and proud to be Hispanic. Privileged that I get to live in a small apartment because I never feel apart from my family. Privileged that I get to eat cereal because some people don't get to eat anything at all. Privileged that I get to say I can teach myself math and be proud of myself for overcoming obstacles without the help of others. I immediately destroy the ivory section in my mind, rebuild it and rename it. Estoy satisfecha. I am satisfied. I step back into reality, grab a rag, join my mom, and get lost in the rhythms of Celia Cruz. La negra tiene tumbao, tiene tumbao, tiene tumbao, tiene tumbao, tiene tumbao. Thank you.
Yes, Natalie, you are privileged as we are to hear your voice. Thank you so, so much. As we absolutely applaud you, you're amazing. And it's wonderful to end this series with student voice. If I could have the PowerPoint slides one more time, please. I just want, again, Natalie, thank you for spending this time. And, you know, as always, the students are, I mean, they just, you know, they just shine, right? So thank you again. And, you know, getlit.org, you can find Natalie. Next slide, please. Again, you will receive an email with the link to the recording, the slide deck, and the resources shared. And I just want to take a moment to say it takes a village. And I just want to thank all of you, our participants, for sharing your experience and your expertise. A big virtual abrazo for our facilitators who volunteered their time to assist us with the communities of practice. We couldn't have done it without you. Huge appreciation to all of our presenters. Thanks to the CalTalk team. And thank you to our tech team, Ed Campos Jr., Philip Casares, and Gloria Ramos. And next slide, please. Muchas gracias. Here are a list of all of the presenters for the 8 community of practice. And again, it's their voices, it's the voices of the field, it's the voices of teachers and administrators. This has made these community of practice sessions so successful and so meaningful. Next slide. Here are the list of our wonderful facilitators. Many of them are Ellie partners and Ellie fellows, and just others who are in the lucha with us. And again, we thank all of you so much. And so on the next slide, again, as we always do, you are invited to, in the chat box, I think we should have, Ed Campos has the link to menti.com, where we would like you to write any wish that you might have for supporting emergent bilingual students, English learners, as we reopen schools by the state, your district, school, colleagues, or Californians together. And again, that's menti.com, and you'll see the link in the chat. And as you are contributing your wishes to that website, we want you to know that, that as we lean on each other through this crisis, que sí se puede. And so with that, I leave you to look at our expression in terms of our wishes for our students and our parents and all educators, that we will get through this and will make a difference and impact English learners so that they get the education that they deserve. Again, I thank all of you.